The passing of time can be strange indeed, as I can't believe it's been a year since I put together that look at some Commodore 64 games released during the mid to late 1990s. Producing that video was a great opportunity to try out some games I wasn't all that familiar with, but also to dive into the archives to see what else had been released during those times. Though it barely scratched the surface of what would be released between the end of the C64's commercial life and the rise of the modern independent publisher, and so I can't help but feel it's time to do it all again, with a look at another 12 games, this time released between the mythical year 2000 and 2012. Once again, my focus isn't on those more widely discussed games, like your Prince of Persia's or your Cannabons, nor will it look at those which have been fortunate enough to receive reissues over the past few years, like the Metal Warrior titles. It's also going to skip over those which I myself spent time with on this very channel recently, like the amazing Knight Grail. With all that out of the way, let's dive in and check out some interesting Commodore 64 games of the early 2000s. Kicking things into gear, and the first game I want to showcase is Electric Arrow's BOFH Servers Under Siege. You take charge of a lone IT employee as you arrive at work kind of late to discover the office taken over by terrorists. Well, it's a 2002 release after all. Anyway, to save the day, you need to work your way through the 6 levels of the building, defeating terrorists and disarming the bombs they've planted in the server racks across each floor. To disarm those bombs, you'll first need to locate and defeat the technicians who carry the disarming steps and plans to build them. Said technicians are easy to spot. They're the ones clad in green uniforms. In fact, each enemy is armed with a different weapon and clad in a corresponding uniform colour, so it's easy to distinguish what type of threat they are just by their colour. Which is most important to know, as you've got 1 hour and a single life to stop their nefarious schemes. As you obtain the disarming notes for those bombs, it's time to use them to cut the wires in the correct order. Be cautious though, as cutting the wrong wire will result in disaster with quite an office-shattering kaboom when all the bombs detonate, ending the game. If there's one thing which makes this one a little tough to get into, that's the controls. Instead of a simple 8-way directional setup, you rotate and move your character like a tank. But the inertia of that rotation can make dispatching enemies feel a little clumsier than perhaps it should be. I found it did add to the challenge here, and considering the game isn't that easy to begin with, even on its easy mode, it's one which might turn you off altogether. For me though, I really dig its concept, and I'll admit I'm willing to sit with those challenge and controls to take on this mission and see if I can actually succeed. If you're up for something a little tougher, then maybe you will be as well. If you recall my first Dark Ages video, one of the games I featured was Crush, which tried to be an unofficial successor to the iconic Katarkus. Well, Smash Designs, the team behind that game, is back, and this time they tried to take on the mantle of Turrican with their unofficial Turrican 3 released in 2004. You may think from the logo and the intro music that they attempted the Herculean task of trying to demake that 16-bit original game. But not in this case. Instead, they've aimed to make a successor to the original C64 games, which is not necessarily a bad thing. And so you should know what to expect here. There's plenty of wide open levels, loads of enemies to blast, exciting weapons to blast them with, plus loads of pickups and diamonds to find. As you'd expect, the feel of Turrican is nailed quite well here, with responsive controls being up there of the original games, so if you have gotten into the groove of either Turrican or Turrican 2, you'll be sure to feel right at home in this newest adventure. As you'd expect, the highlight is of course the bosses. As in the prior games, you've got some gigantic beasties to deal with at the end of each stage, and despite the occasional multiplexer glitch, they're just as challenging as you'd expect. Ultimately though, Turrican 3 may not strike that itch for originality, but it's certainly one which can scratch the itch for some more exploratory running gun action, should you be in the mood for it. It doesn't quite live up to those original games, but it's one which is certainly worth a look at. Now, if you've got that itch for some frenetic, single-screen blasting, perhaps channeling some of that manic Minter mayhem, then Greenrunner and Redrunner may be a pair of games for you. Greenrunner was the first of the pair, released in 2006, with Redrunner coming out the following year. The big difference between them is the visuals, with Greenrunner utilising the Commodore 64's high-resolution character modes, whilst Redrunner goes all out with those chunky, multicolour modes. Other than the visuals, both games pretty much share mechanics. Take charge of the Yellowizer, bring a friend along for the ride in the Cyanizer, and blast your way through 100 stages of chaotic blasting. The first thing which stands out with both games is the fact your ships blast fire in all four directions, which makes the blatting of baddies a little bit of an easier task. Each level requires you to defeat a certain number of them before you can move on, which is handily tracked at the bottom of the screen. One of the elements which makes this duo of frenetic gems stand out is how each stage really plays about with the game's mechanics. From one stage which is played out in bullet time, to the next where you're flipping over to hyperspeed, you always need to be on your toes, which really helps you tied into the experience and keeping control over that tantalising slice of mayhem. Alongside the visuals, there is some rocking synth music playing in both games, and combined with plenty of sampled speech, really takes this from being more than just a throwback into being an outstanding arcade challenge with quite a lot to offer for those who are really after that thrill of the flow, getting into that flow state and racking up plenty of points. For those who are hooked on The Legend of Atlantis from 2018, this next one, Joe Gunn, will certainly be down your alley. In this 2007 release, you play the role of the titular explorer, an archaeologist who's been busy exploring Egypt and managed to discover the tomb of the Crocodile King. Your goal is to enter the pyramid, discover its secrets, and try to get out intact. Which of course takes you on a screen-by-screen adventure through the pyramid, collecting items and of course solving lots and lots of puzzles. It's very much got that old school arcade adventure vibe, as you'll be searching for those items whilst avoiding enemies and really needing to start putting a map together. One feature I greatly appreciate is the lack of fall damage. Many games of this style really would have you die should you fall too far. And with the layout of the pyramid, it certainly would end the game way too quickly, especially when you're starting out and trying to get a feel for the place. Another feature that I think really helps make the experience worth playing is an infinite lives mode right from the outset. Once again, it does as it says on the tin, making Joe's quest that bit more accomplishable, though you can still get yourself trapped if you're not careful. These two features really make this one an approachable experience, even amongst the overall challenge which the game offers. Sure, it's not entirely helped by the game not being great at indicating that you've changed something as a result of solving a puzzle, so you may still be wandering a bit lost as you work your way through. That's truthfully a bit of a minor complaint though. If you're after that arcade adventure exploration action, or you got your fill of The Legend of Atlantis and kind of want more games in the same style, then Joe Gunn is absolutely one adventure you should dive into. One of those things I find myself really enjoying is a unique twist on a classic formula. And that's the case with Argus Software Designs' release, The Adventures of Jim Slim in Dragonland, which I'm just going to refer to as Jim Slim from now on because that is one long title. This one takes the platform puzzler and shifts the focus to be more about rolling than jumping. As Jim Slim, you'll be working your way through 15 themed worlds, aiming to get to the exit before the clock runs out. Each world is comprised of 3 stages, giving you quite a lot of game to work your way through. The challenge here comes from a few factors. The view can kind of be a little constraining when starting out, but I'd say Jim's movement can certainly take some time getting used to, particularly his jumping, without which you won't be getting far at all. Throughout each stage, the focus is on finding keys, avoiding enemies, and using the tricks and traps of the level to avoid death. Whether that's by colliding into said enemies or falling into the traps. Later on, you'll encounter some more dangerous enemies who'll start firing at you, and those can only be dispatched from repeated attacks by the Turrican you'll find during your travels. Taking down these larger enemies offers some additional challenges because of how strong they are, which can make things tricky when you're against the clock to make sure you can reach that end goal. Now, there's plenty of challenge within Jim Slim, and one of its great features is the password system, which rewards you with a password as you complete each of its themed worlds. So, if you happen to be craving a different twist on the puzzling platformer, then Jim Slim is certainly a pick which will give you plenty of challenge and enjoyment, and of course, those dosings of frustration. But it's a great one, and I certainly think you should check it out. Of the selection of games I've put together for this video, many can be seen as original concepts. Though not all of them. Some serve as remakes of games released for newer platforms. But there are also new takes on classics which originally appeared in the arcades or on other platforms of the time. Which brings me to Element 114's Berzerk Redux, which, as you guessed it, is a new take on Stern's arcade classic. If you're not familiar with the original game, it's about making your way through an endless maze with rooms packed to the brim with hostile murder bots. Not only that, but the walls themselves are just as lethal. The goal is to get through each room, clearing out the robots if you can. More importantly, is doing it as quickly as possible, else you'll incur the wrath of the indestructible Evil Otto. As an arcade game which predates the Commodore 64, it's no surprise that the humble breadbin nails it here. The minimalist aesthetic of the visuals is nicely preserved, and the soundtrack carries the ominous tone of the cabinet perfectly. Then, there's the speech. It's a large part of the original game's atmosphere, which many conversions just couldn't do at the time. But Berzerk Redux reproduces it with some clear samples, ensuring the menacing nature is on display as you play. What seals the package though is the ability to save your high scores to disk. It's a port which controls well, plays incredibly close to the arcade original, and just as menacing to boot. Conversions of this quality may not be that rare these days, but back in 2009, it certainly was something which stood out on its own for so many reasons. Staying on the conversion train, up next is the first of a trio of adaptations of Vectrex classics, presented by TRSI. The first of these is Fortress of Narzod, which made its way to the C64 back in 2009. Your mission is to take charge of a hovercar and travel down the roadway to the titular fortress, with the goal to take it out and save the world. This roadway is broken up into 3 sections: the lower roadway, the middle roadway, and the upper roadway. You'll face 3 waves of nasties on each, with each successive wave offering increasing numbers of tougher enemies to deal with. Plus, you'll also face attacks by the warbirds, who will swoop down from the skies to cause plenty of trouble. Hammering your fire button is not the surefire way to victory here, as your shots can ricochet off the highway walls, and yes, if you're not careful, it's you who they'll rebound into and take out, not the enemy. Which I seriously love, as having to be mindful of your position on the playfield when attacking is crucial, resulting in quite a bit of tactical thought needed. This is something which not many other blasters of the era really ever put into practice, so Fortress of Narzod really stands out for me because of this mechanic. Once you've made it through that upper highway, it's time to face the Mystic Hurler out the front of the fortress. As the climactic battle, you need to dodge its fire and land 6 shots on it to take it out, and then, like many a game of yore, you'll do it all over again. just a little harder than before. The Vectrex aesthetics make it feel quite unique with its monochromatic visuals, which, combined with some killer SID jams on the title screen, make it a package which both plays a mean score-chasing shooter with some pleasing aesthetics to boot. Fortress of Narzod is an absolutely cracking shooter which offers something quite unique amongst the many other shooters in the C64's library, and for me, that makes it, well, worth checking out. Onto the next of TRSI's Vectrex port, and it's probably the most well-known of them all, Minestorm. Best known for being the Vectrex's built-in game, arrived on the Commodore 64 in 2010. Unsurprisingly, Minestorm is a take on arcade legend Asteroids, but offering a few unique twists which help it stand out against a field of clones. The goal is to rack up as high a score as possible by clearing out the minefields without losing all of your ships. Where Asteroids offers a few enemy threats, with Minestorm, the mines come in increasing levels of lethality. From the dumb mines which float in a predetermined direction, to those which slowly but surely home in, they offer plenty of challenge and lots to respond to, especially once you get a few levels in and the suicide bullets are introduced from destroyed mines. These certainly make things quite spicy for an unwary player. Seriously. As with Fortress of Narzod, the unique aesthetics of the Vectrex do mean the Commodore 64 experience could be lacking compared to the original hardware, but honestly, it ultimately doesn't harm it. Sure, the player ship looks like it came out of hyperspace from a game of Thrust, and there's no simulation of its overlay, but the stark visuals offer plenty of atmosphere in their own right. As for whether you prefer Minestorm to Asteroids, well, I find it to be a case of 6 of one and half a dozen of the other in my book. Until the release of CBM Asteroids though, this was by far the best take on the flying a spaceship and blasting space debris into dust formula out there, and that makes it an utterly unmissable pick for me. The final game of TRSI's Vectrex trilogy is Spike, once again released for the Commodore 64 in 2010. Unlike the other two, this one isn't a shooter. Instead, it's more of a sort of platformer. As the hapless Spike, your goal is to rescue your partner Molly from the clutches of a nefarious evildoer. What's between the duo is finding the key, then opening the cage which Molly is trapped in, which sounds simpler than it is, thanks to the structure of each stage. It all takes place on a single screen with 2 levels of platforms moving about like a pair of catastrophic conveyors gone rogue. Moving between each layer requires you to cycle your ladder about, then you can hop up and reach the key. Once you've done that, all you'll need to do is jump up and unlock the cage when it appears above you. As with many games of its era, there's a simplistic formula on offer with the mechanics, and so the challenge is increased really as you progress. And this comes particularly from the introduction of various meanies who'll get in your way. Though, they can be dispatched with a bit of a quick kick to the bonds. Compared with the other Vectrex ports by TRSI, Spike offers a few nicer details in the aesthetic front, mainly from the splash of colour which serves as the sky. Then, there's the audio, which includes some very crisp speech, being played as the bookends to both the start and end of each level. The one spot where it falters for me is in the translation of the controls from the Vectrex's 4-button controller to the humble single-button stick of a C64. But that's relatively minor, and one which is certainly not worth writing it off over. Spike is quite a fun, yet different take on the platformer, and it's certainly one worth giving some love to. That is for certain. As mentioned in the intro, one of the games I ruled out featuring in this video was Wide Pixel Games' Night and Grail, and that's only because I gave it the full Scanlines treatment here not so long ago. But between its release and that of its follow-up Pains and Aches in 2018, there was a great little gem they put out by the name of Verywell, the winner of RGCD's 2011 16K Cartridge Game Development Competition. you're tasked with rescuing a number of fairy princesses taken hostage by a dark wizard, and the mission to free them is not an easy one. Starting with the choice of which fairy type to take charge of, the knight, the king, or the queen, each of which offers different attributes, it's time to venture out into a series of surprisingly large levels. They're not just large though, they're also randomly generated between plays. As you explore each one, your progress is updated on the map, shown by holding down the fire button. The goal in each level is to locate a trio of crystals, then make it to the well located in the bottom right of the map, and defeat the guardian of the level's fairy princess. Something I really appreciated when playing this is the way the game is set up to not punish a player for non-perfect play. Though you could slip by the enemies you'll encounter, defeating them earns money which you can use to not only replenish your health, but to buy keys and other items you'll need on your quest. Keys can also be found located about the place as well, and for the chests they'll open, if you're lucky, you may discover those fancier upgrades within. But most of the time, you're likely going to find more money, or even worse, an empty chest. The fact that you can locate upgrades to reveal the entire level map, or even better, get the crystal eye which shows you the location of those crystals you need, helps ensure each level isn't drawn out. Now, Fairy might not necessarily pack the longevity which Knight and Grail or Paints and Eggs did, it does offer a seriously great job of not really overstaying its welcome and giving you plenty of a chilled out exploration good times, and that certainly makes it well worth a play. Time for another duo pairing with Georg Rottensteiner's Get 'em and Get 'em DX, released in 2011 and 2012 respectively. Both of these take inspiration from the rather fab mobile game Forget Me Not, though with a few differences gameplay-wise to not make them a direct pair of clones. The basic goal is to collect all the crosses in each maze before locating the key and leading it to the exit. It's not as easy as it sounds though, as there'll be plenty of enemies who'll be in your way, and they're not particularly easy to defeat, taking quite a few hits before they pop. But when they do, you'll be rewarded with some fruitful pickups. By themselves, they won't do much more than earn points, but collect 9 and you'll be rewarded with one of several bonuses. Whether it's boosting your shot rate, gaining invulnerability, or earning an extra life. It may offer a simple premise, but the procedurally generated levels makes every run quite a thrilling challenge in its own right, especially with the tight time limits you'll be imposed with as you go through. Then you come to the enhanced version, Get 'em DX, and things get even better with a sweet graphical and aural overhaul, along with support for 2-player cooperative gameplay. But as much as I love the overhauled visuals, it does bring one issue up. The fact that the game was designed around fairly small sprites which take up one cell of the map. These larger sprites in Get 'em DX can only be blasted in their lower sections, which, when trying to take one on as you retreat, may make running away with dignity a little fiddlier than perhaps it should be. If you're playing solo, however, I'd say the original Get 'em is a little more enjoyable for that very reason, even with its simpler visuals and audio. Though, if you are able to bring a friend along for the ride, you'll absolutely get a load out of the cooperative modes added to Get 'em DX. Now for the last game of the bunch, and this is Hyper Viper from Jamie Howard, published by Cytronic Software in 2012. From the outset, this certainly looks like a bit of a throwback release. The idea is that you take control of a critter tasked with eating all of the snakes travelling in the maze. That might sound like an easy goal, but you can't take these snakes head on, as they'll eat you instead. Rather, you've got to approach them and start munching on their tails, eventually working your way up to being able to gobble their heads. You've got to be careful though, as if you start biting on a snake at any other point, it'll split up into 2 snakes, which means, oh yes, there's one more you're going to need to clear up before the stage can be completed. That's only the start of what you'll be facing in this maze though. Some of what you can find can be eaten for points. But there are other things which will cause even more havoc, like the egg layers. As with any arcade classic, or perhaps I should say wannabe arcade classic, there's plenty of fruit to nab up as well. And though the scrolling might be a little chunky, at least early on, the pace of the gameplay does ratchet up as you progress throughout the game. But of course, when starting, you've also got the choice between slow, medium or fast speed, which also helps the challenge as well. Hyper Viper probably isn't the type of game which is going to keep you engrossed for months on end, but not every game needs to be that. So I'll tell you this, Hyper Viper is the kind of game that I'd be more than happy to load up every now and then to have a bit of an intense session to try and rack up some high scores and aim to do better than I did the last time. And that in itself is certainly an experience that is absolutely worth having. So there we have it, another 12 interesting Commodore 64 releases, this time from those dark days of the early 2000s. Creating a video like this is great as I get the opportunity to revisit a number of games which I've not sat down with for quite some time. Greenrunner and Redrunner are the pinnacle of those for me, games which take the legacy from Llamasoft's Gridrunner series and build upon those games in ways which offer thrilling mechanics and plenty of excitement. There's also those new discoveries, games I'd been wanting to spend time with for a while now, but finally got motivated to do so. Games like Jim Slim are a great demonstration of this. It's one I enjoy diving into, and one I really want to spend more time with if I can. Besides, it has a load of levels to work through, and the password system makes doing that easier to spread out over a period of time. The same can be said for Joe Gunn, which offers plenty of adventuring joy as well, especially with that infinite lives option available right from the title screen. That's something I feel goes a long way to making Joe's adventure more palatable for those less experienced players. This is of course the moment where I turn things over to you, however. I can sit down and talk about these games for quite a while and showcase them, and talk about why I believe they're interesting. But that's just the first step. I hope it inspires you to check these games out. As always, I've included the necessary links to buy the commercial ones or download those freely available ones and try them out. Whether that's on original hardware, as I've shown here, an FPGA device of your choice, or maybe your favourite emulator. Sit down, play them and have some fun. Then of course, use this as a base to start exploring the wider C64 library on your own. Who knows? Maybe you'll unearth a new favourite to add to your library. And with that, there is nothing more for me to say than thank you very much for watching.